The hotel staff barely noticed the new janitor, except for the intern, who smiled at him like he mattered. The Bellevue carried a silence that wasn't peace, but protocol. In the staff corridors, doors opened and closed with practiced rhythm. Shoes squeaked over polished tiles, voices rarely rose above a murmur. And Graham Wolfe, currently wearing a gray jumpsuit with a faded badge that read, David pushed his mop cart like he'd been doing it for years. No one looked up when he passed. That suited him fine. He'd learned long ago how to disappear. After his father's funeral, when the media vultures wouldn't stop circling, he vanished for 74 days into a cabin upstate, with nothing but canned soup and silence. This time the hiding place was less remote and a lot grimier. But it served the same purpose: escape. The Bellevue wasn't his hotel yet. The boutique chain was a recent acquisition by his family's holding company. The press releases called it a strategic repositioning in lifestyle hospitality. Graham called it a mess. Revenue was tanking, staff turnover was obscene, and the culture toxic. So instead of flying in with suits and spreadsheets, he showed up with bleach and gloves. That morning, he'd been handed a dented janitor's cart that smelled like industrial lemon and hopelessness. The supervisor barely glanced at him before waving toward the back elevators. Don't speak unless spoken to. Stay out of sight during peak guest hours. He'd nodded. Yes, sir. The uniform itched. The gloves were too small. But the indignity wasn't in the gear, it was in how invisible he became. On the 7th floor, a bellhop got reprimanded by Victor Harrington, the PR director, for smiling too much at a departing guest. This isn't a circus, Victor hissed slick in his double-breasted navy suit. You're not here to entertain. You're here to blend in. The bellhop mumbled an apology. Victor didn't even glance at Graham. Later in the staff lounge, Graham witnessed the hierarchy carved in silence. Baristas ignored housekeepers. Front desk trainees sipped stale coffee beside security guards without eye contact. No one tipped anyone. No one thanked anyone. You could clock in and out a full shift and still feel like you hadn't existed. Then there was her. She wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but she had a way of existing fully quietly, like the sound of water trickling in a canyon. Imani Brooks Hotel intern 20-something, always neat, always focused. Natural curls tucked into a low puff name tag slightly askew, like she didn't notice or didn't care. She didn't stand out until she did. Graham first noticed her in the break room. A new housekeeper, nervous and hungry, sat alone pretending not to hear her own stomach. Imani took half her sandwich, wrapped it in a napkin, and passed it over without a word. The housekeeper blinked. Imani just smiled and returned to her clipboard. No one else saw. Or if they did, they didn't care. But Graham did. He couldn't afford to react. Couldn't offer thanks or surprise. He just watched. Hours later, in a dim hallway near the executive suite, Graham wiped a smear off the glass panel. The world outside reflected orange dusk tree shadows stretching like fingers, and somewhere nearby, a voice soft clear hummed a melody he didn't recognize. He didn't move, just listened. When he peeked around the corner, there she was again. Imani crouched down, scrubbing a baseboard, humming like it was a comfort. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. He returned to his cart, unsure why his chest felt tighter. That night, with most of the upper floors cleared for a private event, Graham found himself alone near the ballroom stairwell. The floor was sticky with something sweet, maybe spilled soda, maybe champagne. He filled the mop bucket, shoulders aching, and turned only to knock the entire thing over with his boot. The clang echoed like a gunshot. Water spread fast. He cursed under his breath and bent to grab the mop when, "Whoa, let me help." Imani appeared, sleeves already pushed up, grabbing nearby towels from a closet like she knew exactly where they were. No questions, no side-eye, no hesitation. Together they knelt, pushing water back into the drain. The air smelled like lemon and humility. Graham glanced at her. "You don't have to, I know," she said gently. "But here we are." He nodded, unsure what else to say. They worked in silence for a while. Then, as they stood to rinse out the towels, she tilted her head and looked at him, not through him, but at him. "You don't talk much. But you're not like the others, are you? She smiled, walked off. Graham stood still for a moment after she left the damp towel still in his hand, as if unsure the moment had really happened. All his life as an heir, he'd dealt with flatterers and skeptics, but no one had ever helped him mop the floor without knowing who he was. No questions, no judgment, just help. He returned to the utility room, tucked everything back into the cart. The name on his badge, David, felt heavier suddenly, like the weight of memory. His grandfather, David Wolfe, had once told him, "Never think you're greater than the man who cleans the floor. He's the one keeping the world from slipping." Graham had been 12 then, too young to understand. Now he was slipping, and it was someone like Imani helping him stay upright. The next morning he arrived early. The lobby tiles were still cool from the night air, undisturbed by the first shift's footsteps. He mopped in slow lines, listening to faint jazz piping through the speakers. The moment felt almost sacred, like brewing coffee in an old kitchen, before the house woke up tinged with melancholy and quiet purpose. In the employee corridors, people still passed without greetings, but Graham had become attuned to the undercurrent of conversation. Two front desk clerks whispered that Victor was holding an emergency meeting with regional management. A kitchen staffer grumbled about being short-staffed, while VIPs demanded Napa-style grilled halibut. One doorman muttered that the new janitor guy looks kind of familiar. Graham made a point to keep his head lower that day. He continued studying the unspoken caste system. Doormen received hefty tips and smiled more. Housekeeping staff moved like ghosts. Janitors like him were simply ignored. And yet, tucked into the shadows of service elevators and back hallways, he kept stumbling upon little moments that made him want to believe in people again. Like the time he caught Imani reading from a slim book to a tired receptionist waiting for her shift to end. "A Maya Angelou poem," she said. "She likes when I read it slow." No one had asked her to do it. She did it because she saw people. That afternoon, Graham was assigned to the 10th floor, reserved mostly for business travelers and high-paying clientele. The hallway was long, muffled by plush beige carpet. Room 1012 had its door cracked open just an inch, and Graham caught the sharp edges of a tense conversation. "You think you know them," a woman's voice said. "But they don't see you, Imani. Not really." He froze. There was no mistaking it. That name, her voice. But the other woman wasn't familiar, maybe a relative. "You read Mom's journal again," Imani replied, calm but firm. "You don't have to protect me from what I choose." The door clicked shut. Silence returned. Graham stepped back, uneasy. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He hadn't tried to hear something private, but he'd heard enough to feel the echo of isolation in her voice. When he returned to the employee level, Victor was by the operations desk, sipping espresso and berating a maintenance tech about the HVAC unit, making the hallway sound like a submarine. Graham walked past, pausing only when he spotted Imani stacking printer paper in a corner office alcove. She didn't look up, but when he set a hand on the paper box beside hers, wordless offer to help, she acknowledged him with a soft glance, nothing more. He lifted a few reams without speaking. She continued organizing silently. There was something grounding in it, the shared simplicity, the absence of small talk or expectation. A moment later, her voice reached him, quiet as breath. "You work like someone who's used to being watched," she said. Not a question, not a flirtation, just an observation. He considered responding with humor, but all that came out was, "You see a lot, don't you?" Imani shrugged. "People don't realize how loud they are when they think no one's listening." He nodded. He was starting to learn that. As she walked away again, clipboard in hand, curls bouncing slightly with her steps, he didn't follow. He just stood there watching the shadow she left behind. And for the first time in a long time, Graham Wolfe wasn't thinking about market forecasts, boardroom betrayals, or public perception. He was thinking about a woman who offered half a sandwich to a stranger, who hummed while she scrubbed baseboards, who saw people and might be starting to see him. Late that evening, the hotel was quiet, too quiet. Most of the guests were out for dinner or meetings, and the staff had retreated to their corners. Graham took the opportunity to roam freely, mop in hand, pushing his cart along the 7th floor hallway that housed the hotel's signature suites. A window at the far end of the corridor overlooked the city skyline, now inked in shades of navy and gold. He paused there, resting a moment beside his cart, eyes trailing the glow of Atlanta's heartbeat, pulsing through each flickering building. Something about being unseen in a world so illuminated made him feel oddly grounded. That's when he heard it again, a soft, steady hum echoing down the hallway, low melodic, almost like a lullaby. It wasn't coming from a room, it was from the hallway itself. He followed the sound and turned the corner. There she was. Imani was crouched in front of a mirrored panel, polishing off fingerprints with a worn cloth. Her earbuds dangled loosely from her phone, not even playing. She was humming for herself, not for show. Just like before, her back was straight, her motion smooth, purposeful. She was working late again. She didn't see him at first, so he stayed still. There was a grace in watching someone exist with intention. Graham realized he was holding his breath. Then his elbow clipped the edge of his mop bucket. Crash! The water sloshed violently, the bucket tipped, and a wet roll of paper towels splattered across the polished floor like a surrender flag. Imani startled, turning sharply. Her eyes went wide for a second, then softened. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, crouched beside him, and began picking up the mess. No questions, no judgment, just movement. Sorry, he muttered, embarrassed. No worries. Her tone was light, but her action said more. She didn't just mop the floor. She dabbed his sleeve, handed him a towel, then used her own to gather the last droplets of water. I've done worse, she said with a small smile. One time I tripped over a tray of creme brulee and took out an entire wedding cake. The chef still doesn't talk to me. He chuckled genuinely. I bet you handled that better than I'm handling this. She tilted her head, considering. You don't talk much. But you're not like the others, are you? She smiled, then walked off down the hallway before he could answer. She brought a sandwich wrapped in brown paper and hope folded inside it. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple bundle in her hands, edges creased with care, the kind of wrapping you'd expect from someone who had done this more times than she could count. But Graham noticed it. Not the sandwich itself, but the way she held it, like it was part ritual, part remembrance. He spotted her through the window before entering the diner. Rain tapped lightly on the glass as she slid into the farthest corner booth, the one by the heater vent, that rattled sometimes when the jukebox changed songs. She sat facing the street, shoulders slightly hunched, curls pulled back with a faded bandana. Alone, but not lonely. Inside, Maribel's diner smelled like bacon and dish soap, like memories preserved in grease and coffee. The air was warm, the lighting soft. The place hadn't changed in decades, Graham guessed, except maybe the salt shakers got replaced once a year. It was honest, a little worn, like it belonged to the people who kept the city running. He walked in unnoticed, as janitors often did. The bell over the door jingled once. Marvin Gaye crooned something smooth from the jukebox. A couple of housekeepers from the Bellevue sat near the counter talking about holiday shifts. A security guard nursed a black coffee like it was penance. He chose a seat 2 stools away from the register, his back to the wall, eyes casually drifting toward Imani. She unwrapped her sandwich, slowly unfolding the brown paper like it was something sacred. Inside, peanut butter and banana sliced clean. Graham almost smiled, because he'd seen that before. Years ago, when he was 10, there was a housekeeper named Marta who made him peanut butter and banana sandwiches every Thursday. She'd wrap them in the exact same brown paper and draw tiny stars in the corner with blue ink. Not because she had to, but because she remembered he loved constellations. His parents never noticed. But Marta did. The memory stung in that quiet, grateful way. Maribel shuffled up to him with a pot of coffee. She looked him over, like someone who used to be a mother to teenage boys, sharp, tired, still caring. Refill, she asked, even though his cup was empty to begin with. Sure, he said. She poured, squinting. You from Buckhead Sugar? Graham tensed. It wasn't the first time someone had almost placed him. He shook his head, careful. No. East Side. She narrowed her eyes. You got the kind of hands that ain't cleaned much in a long time. He forced a chuckle. Guess I'm learning. She didn't buy it, but she smiled anyway. Well, east side or not, your boots are clean, which means you're either fakin' or freshly trained. He shrugged, lifting the mug. Just here for the coffee. Maribel snorted and walked off. Graham took that as a small victory. Imani finished half her sandwich and sipped water from a chipped blue cup. A few servers from the Bellevue entered, then upper-tier staff. One of the assistant managers, the catering lead, and a woman Graham vaguely remembered from the events team. They didn't notice Imani, or if they did, they didn't stop. They took a booth on the opposite side, speaking in hushed tones about client RSVPs and preferred donor placements. Graham noticed how Imani glanced their way for a second, just long enough to see she wasn't seen. A moment later, she folded the brown paper back around the sandwich like it was something worth saving. Then she stood up and walked to the counter to pay. Before she left, she pulled a few bills from her pocket and placed them carefully into the tip jar by the register. It was more than the meal cost. Maribel looked at her and winked. Graham watched it all, and then he moved. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, catching up with her before she slipped out the door. Imani hesitated, surprised, but then she stepped aside and gestured back toward her booth. "Sure," she said softly. "It's warmer in here anyway." The booth seat was warm, the kind that hugged your back a little too closely. Graham slid in across from Imani, careful not to bump the table. She pulled her sandwich closer, but didn't unwrap it again. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. Inside, Marvin Gaye gave way to an old Smokey Robinson tune, and the diner seemed suspended between decades. Imani broke the silence first. "You don't strike me as someone who usually eats in places like this." Graham glanced around. "What gave me away? The uniform or the way I almost tripped over the tile?" She smiled gently, not mocking. "Both." He chuckled, leaning back. "Guess I'm not good at blending in." "You're quiet," she said. "Most new hires try to impress someone. Or complain." He raised a brow. "Who would I be trying to impress?" She folded her hands on the table. "Everyone. Anyone. It's kind of the culture at the Bellevue. Like, if you don't make noise, they think you don't matter." "That doesn't sound very welcoming." "It's not," she said plainly. "But that's why I want to change it someday. Maybe be the kind of manager who doesn't look through people." He looked at her, then not at the curls pulled into a neat puff, or the edges of her name tag still clipped to her jacket. He looked at the steel beneath her calm, the kind of resolve that didn't have to shout. "What made you want to work in hospitality?" he asked. Imani glanced out the window, watching a couple cross the street under a red umbrella. "It's the only job I've seen where you can change someone's day with a gesture, a tone, a tray of coffee delivered like it means something." She turned back to him. "When I was little, my mom worked at a motel outside Macon. Budget place. Stained carpet, cigarette burns on the sheets. But she made it feel like a home for every stranger that walked through. She taught me that even people passing through deserve to feel they belong." Graham nodded slowly. "That's rare." She used to say, "Even if no one notices the kindness, do it anyway. It's a deposit you'll never regret." Imani's voice softened. "I still write her quotes down. Keeps me steady." Maribel passed by with a plate of fried okra, offered it to them with a wink. "On the house. You all look like you're talking about something more important than food." Imani laughed. "Thanks, Miss Maribel." Graham tasted one, surprised by the crisp tenderness. "That's good. Some things don't need updating," Imani said. They shared the plate without needing to say much more. Graham noticed he smiled, truly smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Not the forced social kind, not the tight-lipped nod from business dinners. This was easier, softer. Then the bell above the door rang again. 3 senior staff from the Bellevue walked in umbrellas, dripping jackets, too stiff for the rain. The catering manager spotted their usual table and waved for menus. Imani tensed just slightly. Her eyes flicked to Graham. He had already ducked slightly, turning his face and reaching for a rag from the edge of his janitor cart. Nearby, he had left it parked just outside the booth, partly on purpose. Without a word, Imani leaned forward, blocking him from view with her shoulders. She didn't call attention. She didn't laugh. She just quietly shielded him. The senior staff never noticed. Maribel, wiping down a table nearby, caught Graham's glance. Her eyes narrowed with something like recognition, but she said nothing. When the moment passed, Graham exhaled. You didn't say anything, he murmured. Imani looked at him. Why would I? The rain had stopped by the time Graham stepped outside. The pavement glistened under the streetlights, each puddle catching reflections like stolen pieces of the sky. He paused under the diner's awning, uncertain for a moment if he should turn back, say more. But Imani was still inside, chatting with Maribel as she helped stack chipped mugs behind the counter. Something about her lingered. Graham tugged at his coat, ready to head back toward the hotel, when he felt something crinkle in the inner pocket. He reached in. A napkin, folded twice. On it, a line written in neat, looping script. You don't have to be seen to make an impact. He stared at it, thumb running across the ink as if it might smudge. It didn't. No name, no explanation, but he knew who it came from. A soft smile touched his lips, unforced and unfamiliar. For a man used to making headlines with his presence, the words hit harder than expected. He glanced back at the window. Imani had turned away now, back to cleaning, already blending into the backdrop of diner life. No spotlight, no applause. But somehow, she'd just shifted something in him. Without another word, he tucked the napkin carefully into his wallet, right next to the only photo he kept of his grandfather, and walked away, coat still damp but heart a little warmer. Sometimes the greatest kindness happens when no one is watching, and sometimes someone is. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the hotel's back corridors, blending with the rhythmic thump of dryers and the occasional hiss of steam from the pressing station. The laundry room was always too warm and too forgotten. A place of endless motion, but no recognition. That suited Graham just fine. He pushed a rolling basket of fresh linens down the narrow hallway, feeling the industrial wheels squeak under the weight. Janine, an older maid with a limp in her left leg, passed him and gave a polite nod. No one asked questions in the back corridors. They moved, clocked in, clocked out, vanished. Then he heard a voice. "Bless your heart, Victor. I said I'd fix it. Imani." Her tone was tight, but her face held firm as she stood between a young kitchen runner and Victor Harrington. The boy, barely 18 by the look of him, was holding a tray with cracked ceramic bowls, one still dripping soup down his apron. Victor's jaw was clenched in corporate fury, the kind reserved for people you considered beneath scolding. First-week mistakes get first-class consequences. Miss Brooks, Victor said coldly, you might want to rethink who you shield. This isn't a mentorship program. Imani didn't flinch. He slipped. He apologized. I was nearby, and I didn't hear anything crash. Let's not pretend we're running Buckingham Palace. Victor leaned in, his smile poison. Choosing your company wisely is part of career survival here. Graham paused mid-step. The air in the hallway thickened, silent watchers peeking from around linen carts and folding tables. But no one moved. No one spoke. Except Imani. Well, if kindness gets me fired, then at least I'll know what this place actually values, she said, before gently guiding the young man away. Victor turned on his heel without another word, the sharp click of his shoes like exclamation points trailing down the hall. Later that shift, Graham passed Imani sitting on an overturned crate near the service stairwell, sipping from a dented thermos. Her curls were pulled tighter than usual, like a shield. She looked tired, but not defeated. He walked by, casually saw a coffee spill near the locker door, and without a word bent down with a cloth. Imani looked up, surprised but silent. She didn't stop him. When he stood again, she motioned to the empty space beside her. You always clean up messes that aren't yours, he shrugged. Seems like someone should. She sipped. You mop like someone who's never had to do it before. Graham gave a small smile. That obvious, she chuckled. Your hands, they don't have calluses, and your back's too straight. You weren't trained by hotel life. He said nothing. She didn't press. The rain had started again, faint and steady tapping on the back stairwell door, like a gentle rhythm no one danced to. In that quiet, the silence between them felt almost safe. People see what they want, she said softly. Some think I'm soft because I help people. Others think I'm calculating. But truth is, I just don't want to become like everyone else. Graham looked at her. Really looked. What's that mean? It means not being scared to care even when it costs you something. He nodded slowly, letting her words settle between them like folded linens. The conversation lingered with Graham long after Imani left for her next task. He returned to the laundry station and pretended to sort towels, but his mind was elsewhere, specifically on a face from a photograph he had spotted the day before in a back hallway. A framed tribute, yellowing with age, hung above the staff lockers. It was a group photo, old uniforms beaming smiles, hands on shoulders in solidarity. And in the front row, standing proud in a floral blouse and apron, was Ruth Brooks. He hadn't meant to linger there earlier. It was just something about the name had nudged a memory awake. Now the name tugged harder. That afternoon, between shifts, he logged into the outdated staff payroll system from a maintenance tablet he'd borrowed under the pretense of checking water pressure logs. Ruth Brooks, he typed. The screen blinked. Then a record appeared. Housekeeping staff, employed for 19 years, passed away 5 years ago. Notes from HR. Quiet, reliable, well-loved by returning guests. A lump formed in his throat before he could stop it. She had been part of the hotel's soul. And now her daughter was quietly defending everything her mother once stood for. Graham backed out of the system, wiped the screen clean, and powered off the tablet. Later, while passing the service elevators, he heard Janine muttering under her breath. Kids' tuitions paid just like that. Somebody's fairy godmother came through. Or someone's got secrets and a conscience, replied the security guard beside her, not noticing Graham listening behind a corner. He made a mental note someone in the hotel was helping staff anonymously. But who? That evening, as the shift ended, Graham found himself once again near the locker hallway, the same stretch Ruth had likely walked 1,000 times, mop bucket trailing behind her badge, clipped slightly crooked. He stood there now, silent, staring at the tribute photo again. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn. I always pause here too, said Imani behind him. That's my mom. Ruth. Graham stiffened. She loved this place, she continued, walking up beside him. Not because it was easy, but because she believed dignity wasn't about your job title. She used to say, even glass doors need love. He nodded faintly. She sounds incredible. She was. She turned to him. You knew her? A beat. He swallowed. No, I just noticed the name. That's all. Imani smiled softly, clearly sensing something more, but letting it go. Funny, most people walk by this wall without seeing it. They're not really looking, he said. She looked at him, then eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition. Before she could say more, a voice called from down the corridor. Imani. It was Victor again. She exhaled sharply. Duty calls. She started walking, then stopped and looked back. You don't have to answer this, but who are you really? He hesitated. I'm just someone trying to understand what I missed the first time around. That night, long after most of the staff had left and the silence of the hotel settled like fog across the corridors, Graham remained. He swept the hallways slowly, though they were already spotless. Each step echoed a little too loudly. Each light flickered a little too long. He passed the elevator bay and walked toward the locker room. The same one Ruth likely used, the one Imani now walked through every day without knowing how much history lived in its dust. He paused outside the door. Inside, a soft humming floated through the vents. It wasn't Imani, he knew her tune by now. It was Janine, probably finishing the last set of folded linens. Graham walked in anyway. No one paid him much mind. Just another quiet janitor in a space full of noise that pretended to be silence. He made his way to the far end of the lockers, where the tribute photo of the old staff still hung. For a long moment he just looked. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was one of the quotes from the napkin Imani had once tucked into his coat. He had kept it, memorized it. You don't have to be seen to make an impact. He read it again, then carefully slid the paper behind the photo frame, placing it like a silent offering beneath Ruth's smile. The room was empty, but he still whispered, "Thank you." And then a voice broke the quiet. I knew I recognized you. Graham spun around. Victor stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. You clean floors like you've never held a mop in your life, Victor said slowly, and you watch people like you're trying to buy them. Graham stayed still, calm. Victor stepped forward. You're not just some hired help. You're someone. And I don't like not knowing who someone is. But before he could say more, the door swung open again. Imani stepped inside, holding a set of freshly laundered towels. She stopped, eyes moving between the two men. Tension, she asked gently. Victor forced a chuckle. Just giving the new guy some career advice. Imani raised an eyebrow. Well, I'll take it from here. Victor narrowed his eyes at her, then gave Graham one last pointed look before walking out. Imani set the towels down, glanced at Graham. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. Just learning how to disappear properly. She smiled. You're not very good at it. He let out a soft laugh. Guess not. Then he sat on the bench, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. She didn't press him, just sat beside him in companionable silence. The hum of vending machines, the faint clink of a water pipe, those were the only sounds for a while. Eventually, Imani stood, brushed off her pants, and gave him a warm glance. Sometimes the greatest kindness happens when no one is watching, she said. Then she hesitated. And sometimes someone is. She walked out without waiting for a reply. Graham stayed frozen, her words settling deeper than he expected. Then, for the first time since arriving, he whispered something out loud in the locker room, where no one could hear, except maybe the ghosts of those who once worked here. I know who she is, and she has no idea who I am. The holiday was meant to bring people together, but tonight one truth might tear them apart. The break room smelled like cinnamon smoked turkey, and something sweet bubbling beneath layers of melted marshmallows. Fold-out tables were dressed in disposable harvest-themed tablecloths. Paper turkeys hung crooked on the walls, and a soft gospel melody from a Bluetooth speaker echoed through the linoleum-floored space. Staff had filtered in throughout the evening, each setting down a treasured family dish with quiet pride. Fried catfish sat beside baked mac and cheese. Collard greens shared space with buttered rolls. Imani carried in her mother's cranberry orange relish, wrapped in foil with a note tucked under it. Make room for joy. She smiled as she placed it near the center. Graham, still David, to everyone else, arrived carrying a small covered casserole dish. Sweet potato casserole, warm, heavy, and golden on top. He had made it himself, following the faded handwriting of an old recipe Ruth had once sent him decades ago. He didn't remember receiving it until he found it tucked in a box of keepsakes, still scented faintly like cloves and thyme. Imani noticed. You cooked? She asked, a little surprised, but mostly amused. Graham looked sheepish. Something like that. She lifted the foil, sniffed, and raised her brows. This smells like the holidays at my aunt's house. Are you sure you're not Southern? He laughed softly. I've been taught by the best. As she moved to greet someone else, Graham caught her profile in the glow of the string lights. Her cheeks warm, her curls pinned up in a festive twist, a subtle shimmer along her collarbone. She seemed more relaxed tonight, her kindness undiluted by hierarchy or uniform. He wished he could hold this version of her still just for a moment. Victor lurked near the coffee machine, pretending to sip something from a styrofoam cup. His eyes trailed over the room like a scanner. Graham felt it the way one feels heat before flame. Victor knew something, or suspected it. The man's smirk was too practiced tonight. And then, just as someone pressed play on an old gospel cover of This Little Light of Mine, the door swung open. Heels clacked. Heads turned. Celeste. The room seemed to hush all at once, gospel dimming beneath the weight of high-end perfume and a trench coat no staff member here could afford on 2 months' salary. She was elegance incarnate, flawless poised, and completely out of place. And she wasn't supposed to be here. Graham's breath caught. The casserole in his hand suddenly felt like a schoolboy's offering. Celeste's eyes scanned the room and landed on him with delicious triumph. David, she purred loud enough for everyone to hear, you're cleaning floors now. A fork clinked onto a plate. The music skipped. Someone whispered, wait, what? Imani's hand froze halfway toward the mashed potatoes. She turned, her eyes narrowing, not yet connecting all the dots. But she recognized the tone in the woman's voice, like silk laced with poison. Celeste stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, come on, she said lightly, as if this were a cocktail party, not a staff potluck. He's the owner. Didn't you all know? Silence dropped hard and fast. Graham's mouth opened, then closed. The room shrank around him. He could see it, the shock spreading across faces, the suspicion pooling behind every glance. Victor leaned against the wall, arms folded, lips twitching like a man who'd just thrown gasoline and now waited for the spark. Imani stood still, blinking slowly. What did you say? Celeste laughed, crisp and charming. David here is actually Graham Wolf, Wolf Resorts, the man behind that shiny corporate nameplate at the front desk. She tilted her head at him. I thought your little experiment ended weeks ago. Imani's eyes didn't move from him. They held him in place more tightly than any uniform had. Is that true? Her voice was quiet, controlled, too controlled. Graham took a breath. Imani, I was going to tell you, when her voice cracked just slightly. Before or after the next potluck, he stepped toward her, but she shook her head. The string lights behind her flickered. Someone had turned the music off completely. It was just quiet now, thick, stifling quiet. You let me talk to you like you were one of us. She whispered, her fingers curling into her palms. You watched, listened, asked questions like it mattered. And all this time, you knew. It did matter, he said too loudly. Then softer, you matter. Imani laughed, bitter, not broken. Do you know what it's like to work this hard to be seen, to have to earn space, earn warmth, while you slip in and out like it's a game? Celeste raised a brow. Oh dear, I didn't mean to cause a scene. She turned to Victor, who hadn't moved. But you should really watch who your staff cozy up to. Might be bad for PR. Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. Imani grabbed her coat from the back of her chair. Happy Thanksgiving, she said flatly, and walked out without looking back. Graham wanted to follow, to explain, to undo. But his feet stayed rooted where shame had nailed them. And then, as people began to whisper, to clear dishes, to pretend the moment hadn't splintered, the evening Graham sank onto one of the folding chairs. His sweet potato casserole sat untouched on the table beside him, steam now gone cold. He stared at it blankly. The dish that had been Ruth's. The staff room gradually emptied one by one, like people fleeing the awkward aftertaste of truth. No one looked directly at Graham, not even Victor, who finally exited with a smirk of satisfaction plastered across his narrow face. The folding chairs creaked under their absence. The lights stayed on, but felt dimmer, hollower. Graham remained seated motionless until the silence started pressing on his ribs like regret. Finally, he stood lifting the casserole dish with both hands. He brought it to the small break room sink and dumped it out, watching the spoonfuls of orange and cinnamon swirl into something shapeless, flavorless. He didn't speak a word. In the quiet, he noticed something pinned to the bulletin board near the door. Amid the flyers for CPR training and leftover Halloween coupons, a black and white photo was taped to the corner, yellowed with age, but still crisp enough to make out the faces. A group of staff stood smiling in front of the original Bellevue lobby. Tidy uniforms, some tired eyes, but joy radiated from their posture. His eyes scanned the group and stopped there she was. Ruth, Imani's mother, his childhood housekeeper. She looked so young in the photo, barely older than Imani was now. In her arms, a baby boy, not more than a year old. Curly-haired eyes wide and unsure, clutched a stuffed elephant. His elephant. Graham stepped closer, heart thudding. His hand trembled as he reached for the corner of the photo where a faint ink scrawl bled through time. He peeled the picture gently from the board and flipped it over. The words on the back were faded but still legible, for the boy who needed gentleness most. He ran a finger across the letters, barely breathing. All this time, all these years, he had been raised with that warmth, with that quiet, unannounced kindness. And somehow he had forgotten until Imani walked into his life with the same kind of heart her mother had shown him long ago. He sat down again, this time with the photo in his lap. It was more than a memory, it was a mirror. It was proof that what he had found in Imani wasn't new. It was something returned, and yet she had no idea who he really was. Graham whispered to the empty room voice, raw with a truth only the walls could hear. I know who she is, and she has no idea who I am. Before disappearing, she left a letter he wasn't meant to read, but every word changed him. The rain came in soft sheets that morning, tapping against the wide windows of Graham's penthouse like a metronome for regret. He hadn't been back here in weeks. The usual crispness of the air, scented faintly with leather and bergamot, felt foreign now. Too polished, too quiet. His janitor's badge, David, still sat folded beside a tarnished lunch container on the counter, as if mocking him. He stood in front of the fireplace, envelope in hand, staring at it, like it might vanish if he blinked. The handwriting was unmistakable, round careful cursive. No address, no name, just sealed truth. Imani must have left it the night she packed up and walked out of the Bellevue, before anyone could convince her to stay, including him. She once told him in that sleepy diner booth with Marvin Gaye humming in the background, "I write letters I never send." And yet here he was, reading one. He sat down, slowly unfolding the paper, as if it might tear under the weight of his guilt. Her words weren't dramatic. They were quiet, like her voice had always been, honest. There's a kind of kindness that feels like sunlight through a cracked window. You don't expect it, but when it lands on you, you stop moving just to feel it. That's what you were, until I realized you weren't real. And maybe that's my fault, for thinking someone like you could see someone like me. He exhaled through his nose, rubbing at his jaw. The letter wasn't angry. It didn't ask for anything. But every sentence pressed against the hollowness in his chest, stirring memories he didn't want to unpack. Yet memories of Ruth holding his hand during thunderstorms, of a teenage Graham being told to never talk to the help again after she was let go. He hadn't remembered her name until now. Graham Rowe's letter still in hand and crossed the room to his office. He opened his laptop and pulled up the internal audit of the Bellevue's PR budget. Line after line confirmed what he'd suspected. Victor had been quietly redirecting funds, meant for staff wellness, into side deals, lavish events, personal promotions, and God knows what else. 2 clicks, 1 call. "Victor Harrington, your access has been terminated," Graham said calmly into the phone. "Security will escort you out within the hour." The man stammered on the other end, his voice flipping between outrage and panic, but Graham had already disconnected. He closed the laptop and let the silence settle. Then slowly he picked up his phone again, this time dialing a number he'd only found after asking an old maintenance supervisor for help. "Hello," a woman's voice answered. Older, warm but cautious. "Mrs. Brooks," he asked, heart hammering. "This is Graham Wolfe." A pause. Then, "Well now, that's a name I never thought I'd hear again. Is this about Imani?" "No, ma'am. It's about you. About what you did for my family." He heard her shift a soft inhale through the receiver. "I didn't do much but bring light where I could. Your father, he needed a little of that back then." Graham closed his eyes. "He never told me, but I remember you. I remember your hands brushing hair from my forehead when I was sick. I didn't know that was you until I saw the photo." She chuckled lightly. "Most folks didn't see me, child. But that's okay. I didn't need to be seen." That sentence sat heavy. It was Imani's spirit, too present, not performative. "Would you mind," Graham asked softly, "if I did something in your honor? For Imani. For others like her." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Only if you do it with the same hands you used to hold that mop. Quiet ones." "I will." Outside, the rain kept falling. But for the first time in days, Graham felt something loosen. Not washed away, but cleansed. The boardroom felt colder than usual. It wasn't the temperature, though. Outside, Atlanta's December drizzle had dulled the skyline to a gray blur, but the mood inside, sterile and corporate, where no one dared speak before Graham did. He sat at the head of the long oak table, the same man who once walked these halls in a janitor's uniform. Except now his eyes were sharper, focused. The letter from Imani wasn't in his hand anymore, but it might as well have been etched into his chest. Across from him sat the board of directors, 5 men in tailored suits, 2 women in jewel-toned blazers, and 1 empty seat, Victor's. "Thank you for making time," Graham began, voice level. "Today's agenda has shifted." A few exchanged looks. He continued, "Our internal audit confirmed gross misappropriation of PR funds. The director responsible is no longer with us. No names, no drama, just truth." One woman, Tanisha, head of human resources, nodded solemnly. "What do you propose we do next?" Graham leaned forward slightly. "We do what we should have done months ago. Reinstate Ms. Imani Brooks's internship. Effective immediately." There was a pause, more out of surprise than resistance. "She's already completed the hours. The client satisfaction reports with her name on them outshine 3 full-time staff and—" He hesitated, softening. And she's one of the few people in this building who understands hospitality isn't about polish, it's about presence. Another board member, a gruff man named Leonard, folded his arms. Won't look good. Bad optics reinstating someone after a public scene. It's not about optics, Graham replied calmly. It's about integrity. Something this place was built on when Ruth Brooks still walked these floors. That name landed like a bell chime. A few blinked. One man nodded slowly. Tanisha tilted her head. What about the rumors Mr. Wolf's staff are whispering about a secret donor funding a new initiative? He didn't blink. Let them whisper. In his office drawer sat a draft flyer announcing a scholarship program titled the Housekeeper's Daughter Fund. It wasn't flashy, just a modest endowment aimed at covering housing books and mentoring for first-generation hospitality interns. He hadn't signed it. On purpose. Back at the Bellevue's lower level, in a quiet break room still half decorated from Thanksgiving, Graham watched as the first printed copy slid from the old staff printer. A single sheet, black ink on cream paper. The header was simple. For those who show up even when no one's watching. The bottom line read, Applications open now. Community advisor position available. Contact HR. And one name was circled in red. Imani Brooks. He didn't post it on a bulletin board, didn't email it. Instead, he left it folded neatly on the cafeteria table, where she used to sit beside a napkin holder she once fixed with a rubber band. He placed a small paperweight on top. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then he heard footsteps. It was Maribel. She picked up the flyer, squinted, and let out a single huff of breath. About damn time, she muttered, then turned around without a word. He smiled to himself. Not because of recognition, but because it felt right. Graham sat by the wide window of his penthouse. The skyline of Atlanta stretched beyond like a silent confession. The rain had returned soft and persistent, tapping the glass like an old friend who'd never stopped checking in. He cradled a tumbler of untouched whiskey, not for drinking, but for remembering. The letter sat unfolded on his lap. Imani had never meant for him to read it. There was no signature, no date. Just thoughts spilled onto a lined sheet of notebook paper, crease smudged and heartbreakingly honest. Sometimes I think kindness is a trick. Like maybe when someone is kind to me, they're just playing pretend until they get what they want. But then, sometimes someone does something small like offer a warm towel or remember your name and it feels real and terrifying. He closed his eyes. It wasn't the words that undid him, it was the restraint in them. She never accused, never begged, just told her truth and folded it up tight, like all the pain she carried couldn't take up too much space in the world. Downstairs, the hotel buzzed with murmurs, the mysterious scholarship fund, the sudden disappearance of Victor Harrington, whispers of a janitor who wasn't what he seemed. But up here in the quiet, Graham made another decision. He picked up his phone. His hands hesitated before he dialed. Brooks' residence came the voice, older now, a little raspier, but unmistakably Ruth. Brooks, Graham said, trying not to let emotion steal his voice. You may not remember me, but you used to sing Lean on Me in the staff kitchen when I was 5. You gave me peppermint when my father was too busy to notice I had a fever. A long pause. Then softly, Graham Wolf. He swallowed. I wanted to thank you for what you gave me back then. And for who your daughter is now, Ruth chuckled gently. Imani's got more of her father's fire, but I always hoped she'd carry my softness. She carries more than that, he said, voice low. She carries everything good about this place. Outside, the city lights flickered against wet pavement. Graham stood, turned from the window, and looked back toward the envelope still lying open on the coffee table. He walked toward it slowly and placed a new note beside it, his own handwriting short and simple. Some letters don't need to be sent, but some truths do. Then he picked up the folded staff flyer and walked toward the door. He didn't need applause. He didn't even need forgiveness. He just needed to do what was right quietly, finally. She came back for a job, but what she walked into was far more than a paycheck. Imani stood just outside the staff lounge of the Bellevue, the soft hum of choir music drifting through the cracked door. She hadn't planned on coming tonight. The invitation had come in the form of a simple flyer slipped under her apartment door with one sentence in red ink, New Year's Eve. Bring yourself. She had almost thrown it away. Almost. But now, here she was, wool coat, buttoned tight, curls tucked beneath a scarf, hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the possibility waiting inside. Through the small pane of glass, she could see movement. People milling around a folding table lined with mismatched dishes, mac and cheese in foil trays, peach cobbler in a chipped ceramic dish, fried okra sitting next to a bowl of grapes, someone clearly brought last minute. Gospel music floated in the background, an old Clark Sisters track that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. It looked like home. She stepped in quietly, no fanfare, just the quiet hush of shoes against carpet. A few heads turned. Then a warm voice called out, "Well, I'll be look who the wind brought back." Maribel, in a green holiday sweater with blinking lights, elbowed her way toward Imani, arms open wide. "You still make an entrance like you own the room, baby." Imani laughed softly into the hug, unsure whether to cry or collapse. "I don't own anything." "You sure?" Maribel pulled back. "'Cause you sure stole a few hearts when you left." There was laughter from behind the counter. Even Janine, who rarely cracked a smile, gave her a knowing nod while stirring the cider pot. But Imani's eyes scanned the room until they found him. Graham. He wasn't standing on a platform or holding a mic. He was holding a stack of paper plates, handing them out one by one like a man who'd finally learned the value of small things done quietly. He wore no suit, just the soft gray sweater sleeves pushed to the elbow and jeans that had clearly seen real work. And when he saw her, he didn't rush, didn't smile wide, just gave the smallest nod and invitation with no pressure. Imani took a plate. She stood beside him in the line, like any other staff member, waiting behind a couple of new interns, giggling over the cobbler. For a moment, no one said a word. Then she whispered, "I came for the job." He handed her a plastic fork. "And I think I'm staying for something else." Their eyes met. There was nothing polished between them now. No name tags, no lies, no billionaire or intern. Just two people bruised by their own truths, still showing up, still choosing presence. The staff lounge had dimmed further as midnight approached. String lights blinked softly above, casting a golden warmth across the room. The din of clinking forks and low conversation gave the night a heartbeat, gentle, unhurried, steady. Graham stood beside Imani near the far wall, where a small corkboard displayed old staff photos, faded announcements, and a yellowed newspaper clipping of Ruth Brooks receiving a 10-year service pin. Without saying a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small gift-wrap box. No bow, just brown paper and a single strip of white tape, like one of Imani's sandwiches. He offered it to her with both hands. She hesitated, then took it. The paper crinkled delicately as she peeled it away. Inside was something unexpected, small, worn, and protected under clear lamination. Ruth's old hotel keycard. Imani drew in a breath as if the card carried scent of fried onions, pressed uniforms, and late-night footsteps echoing down quiet hallways. "How did you get this?" she asked, her voice breaking into a hush. "I found it in the back of the records drawer," Graham said. "No one had touched it in years, except maybe me when I was 10. She looked up at him. "My father never said it out loud," he continued, "but Ruth was the reason he made it through that first year after losing my mother. He told me once there was a woman at the hotel who brought him sweet potato biscuits on the days he didn't want to leave bed." Imani swallowed hard. "That sounds like her." Graham took the keycard from her hands, turned to the corkboard, and pinned it beneath Ruth's photo. Then, with quiet reverence, added a small hand-printed card underneath. "In memory of those who made us better when no one was looking." They stood side by side, the room settling into reverent silence as a few others gathered around reading the tribute. No one clapped, no one needed to. A choir rendition of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" began to play through someone's Bluetooth speaker. It was 10 minutes to midnight. Graham turned toward her. "I never wanted you to find out the way you did." "I know," she said. "You gave me the gift of being seen without all the noise. That's something I didn't know I needed until I lost it." "I never wanted the spotlight," Imani said softly. "I just wanted to do something that mattered." "You did. You do." There were no grand speeches, no champagne flutes, raised no firework finale. Just warmth, quiet, and the hush of a moment before something new begins. At 11:59 p.m., the lounge lights dimmed a little more. Someone began the countdown, voices overlapping and breathless. 10, 9, 8. Graham and Imani stood shoulder to shoulder, neither looking at the clock. They weren't rushing toward the future, they were quietly mending the past. 7, 6. He glanced at her, unsure, vulnerable. 5, 4. She met his gaze and nodded once, barely perceptible. 3, 2. Graham leaned in, no grandeur, no hesitation. His forehead touched hers, their eyes closed. No kiss, just a stillness that spoke louder than any fireworks. One Happy New Year. Around them cheers erupted, laughter clapping the squeak of cheap noisemakers. Staff embraced. Peach cobbler was passed. Someone popped a bottle of sparkling cider. But Imani and Graham stayed in that hush between breaths, the moment stretching just long enough for truth to take root. She exhaled first. I came back for the job, she whispered, barely audible, above the Marvin Gaye song, resuming in the background. Then her voice found more certainty. But I stayed for something else. Graham smiled. Not the polite, trained kind, but the slow, uneven smile of a man learning to feel safe in honesty. I'm not a title, he said, and you're not a role to fill. What we are doesn't need a spotlight. Behind them, a group of new interns admired the corkboard and its quiet tribute. Maribel handed out mismatched mugs of hot cider. The room didn't sparkle, but it glowed. Imani turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at Graham one last time. She didn't need a farewell. Instead, she said the things she'd kept locked behind small smiles and silent gestures for weeks. Turns out the man mopping floors was the only one who saw me. And then she was gone, walking slowly, steadily into the next chapter of her life. She didn't return for applause, and he didn't need a stage. In a world obsessed with names and titles, it was their quiet choices, the mop handle, the shared meal, the laminated key card that left the truest mark. Kindness, after all, doesn't wear a uniform or demand to be seen. It simply shows up, especially when it matters most. Like a porch light on. In the distance, it reminds us sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who hold the room together. And if this story touched something in you, maybe pass a little warmth along someone nearby could be waiting to feel seen.